shit out of you.
Hi, I can see we have some participants. That's great to see. There's a couple of minutes before we start, but welcome to those people who are already with us. We're already here after some last-minute technical hitches, and we'll just wait for some more people to join us. I hope everybody can hear us okay.
We're expecting about 46 people today joining us, even from Germany and South Africa.
Excellent. Our wings are spreading wide.
Yep. 17 now.
Are they flooding in, Lauren?
Yes, we're slowly getting there. Well, quickly getting there. Just waiting on another 20, I believe.
I hope everybody's sitting comfortably. We will start in any event, I think, in just 1 or 2 minutes.
Yes. Just populating now, James.
We better move, Deborah, otherwise people will think we're frozen.
Yeah, we are here. I don't know, they'll just see me drinking my tea, won't they?
Yeah, that's a very nice mug.
Not my mug, though, is it?
No, it's not your mug.
Someone stole that this morning.
She's got about 30 in now.
Okay, I think we should start.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us this morning for our Quarry Water Management and Licensing webinar. First of all, let me just start off by introducing your hosts, Deborah and James. Deborah is a principal hydrogeologist and has been with Envireau Waters for 3 years. She mainly works within the quarrying and mining sectors and has led our new authorization applications. James founded Envireau Waters and has over 30 years experience within the minerals industry and is a nationally recognized expert in abstraction licensing. So we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar, which you can either enter into the Q&A panel or direct to me using the chat function. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website to view later today. But that's it from me. I will pass over to James and Deborah to kick off today's webinar.
Thanks, Lauren. Let me just get the first slide up. And thank you all for joining us. We're talking today about dewatering in the UK, particularly England and Wales. And we're focusing this presentation on estate managers and mineral planning experts specifically. The key things that affect those people are listed there, and that's essentially what we're going to go through the presentation. We'll do a little catch up as to why we're here, and we won't concentrate too much on the past. It's about going forward that's important. We'll talk about data and evidence-based gathering, which is absolutely critical to the process that we need to follow. We'll talk about analysis, how much, what's appropriate to meet the new regulatory framework. And we'll also talk a little bit about the presentation of information and framing that information to the audience that's receiving it, which is different from before.
James, I'm just going to interrupt and just ask you to share your screen, please.
Oh.
I will do that. If only
I could control the mouse from this side.
Side, yeah. So we'll
Yeah. And then go to the presentations. I think we're showing Lauren's beautiful face at the moment. Yeah.
There we go. Anybody would think we'd practiced, which we did, but not that bit. So without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Deborah, who's going to take us through the first couple of slides while I try and behave.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one with James about the controls. What I thought we would start with is just a quick catch up with where we are today. Obviously, the phrases transitional arrangements, new authorisations have been going on for many years now. And actually, when we say many years, it is, we're talking sort of James's timescale of hydrogeology, not mine, in terms of how far back this has gone. So where we were is in the back end of 2017, the exemption for dewatering which quarries were operating under got removed. So this meant that every quarry that was dewatering required an extraction license for that activity. Now, to allow the quarries to go into this new regulatory network, what they did is the EA and NRW arranged a sort of transitional period where quarries could provide evidence over the past 7 years, so between 2011 to 2017, that they were dewatering and the volumes of water and how they were dewatering, and they could use that evidence to get a validated transitional arrangements application. Now these went in, we did Envireau Waters.
163 in total.
Yeah, we did a fair few, and actually I got to see a lot of quarries. And we submitted as a company between 2018 and a few trickled into the start of 2020. So that was sort of the 2-year window that we had to get these applications in, and then the EA and NRW now have 3 years to actually determine those licenses. And we're starting to see these going into determination, and we're also having the first licenses starting to be reissued. Now, they should have already been issued, but obviously we're all working in slightly unexpected situations at the moment. So they're working on them now. So that is where anybody who submitted something that might be referred to as a new authorization application, or officially the transitional arrangements application, that's where you are with that. Where we are now, as James says, we're looking forwards in this presentation to something that I termed the new era at some point. And in the new era, you are required to have an abstraction license. But because, or in any circumstance that the activity that you were doing occurred only after the start of 2018, you were not able to get a transitional arrangements application. You fell under the normal regulations, and it's something that you might be heard termed as a new water application. That's another phrase. And these are different. You cannot follow the same evidence base, and it's these new, so sort of like this red line that we're showing here, these abstraction licenses in the new era that this presentation is going to focus on today. Because we're sort of done with the transitionals.
Yeah.
I feel like, there's going to trickle through the determination, and there could be a whole nother presentation on that potentially, but yeah, so that's where we are. We're going new era, and we're looking at these abstraction licenses specifically for dewatering activities. We can get really carried away with these terms, getting really used to them, and it's something that we just thought, let's have a quick pause and just make sure everyone is aware what we mean by an abstraction license. So really simple, like in a simplified way, there's 3 base ones, and I'm not going to discuss the temporary license because that's not really applicable to the people on this call. The 2 main ones that are the transfer license and the full license. Now these are both abstraction licenses, so it's a transfer abstraction license and a full abstraction license. Now these have different uses, and they also have different things like costs associated to them and different ways of evidencing them. So just to break it down really quickly, your transfer license, that's basically your dewatering license. It's moving the water from one area of your quarry to another, typically moving it maybe from a sump to throwing it into the river nearby. And these are the big pumps that we see around the quarries. You might have a couple, you might just have one, depending on what your quarry is. Your full abstraction license is water that you need for something. Again, within the quarry sector, we're looking at things like running wheel washers, making sure you've got water for dust suppression, mineral washing. These licenses were actually already required prior to the start of 2018. But if we're honest, maybe not all quarries had them, and maybe not everybody was taking them quite as seriously as maybe they should have been. So that's something that we're just tidying up as well as we all start to look into this new era of water licensing within quarries. When we were doing all the transition arrangements work, and every time I actually pick up a new quarry, the first thing I do is draw a schematic like this, which is basically a really simplified water management plan for the site. It actually amazes me how few quarries have these to hand. I was actually quite surprised with that. So this is a very simple one, and I just thought it was useful to show you where things like the transfer license might actually sit in a real life quarry. So for example, here you're moving water from your sump to a lagoon, and your transfer license would sit there. And then maybe you're taking water out of that lagoon to use it for dust suppression and wheel wash. And in that instance, that would be where you needed an abstraction license. Again, I have shown on here, we're not covering it in this discussion, but there is a discharge permit as well. So it's important to just have the 3 things. As I said, one of the things I'm always keen, James is so knowledgeable on this topic, I want to make it more accessible for people. When I was going through this presentation with James, I realised that people might not have ever actually seen a licence before. So James has got the controllers, I'm going to hope that this works. We very quickly, if you could just switch up to the top, please. Thank you. Just got a redacted.
Sorry, Deborah, we just can't see that one. So if you go back to slide share, you'll be able to pick the PDF screen.
Oh, yeah. So we go back to Zoom, please. Just the other one. Or I could just talk you through it.
I need to stop sharing. Sorry, I realised what we're doing now. We're going to share the screen again, and we're going to pick that one. That's what we're going to do. There we go.
You have learned Zoom during the webinar with people.
Who would guess that we use MS Teams most of the time?
I know, yeah. So this is just, it's a redacted abstraction license that we've been working on for one of our quarry operators. And I just wanted to highlight the various things that fall into this. So you've got a description of where it's happening. So these are grid references, specific locations. You detail how the pumps are doing, where you're moving the water, and the uses of it. So this license has mineral washing and dust suppression and wheel washing, and each of them have their own volumes as well. So it's very specific what you can use your water for, where you can take it from. And if you just scroll down to the next page for me, James. The license also has conditions on it. The basic ones are to do with how that should be metered and how the data is recorded from the volumes that you're abstracting. But they can also add in additional conditions above the normal ones. And this quarry, for example, has one relating to the continuation of the water monitoring and mitigation, which is part of the quarry's planning permission. So it's this sort of overlap is occurring between the planning works and the licensing works now. So, oh, James is expertly doing this now. We're just going to flick back to the presentation. And I think James is going to pick up for us. So I hope that that's just a useful catch up of where we are today.
As you heard there, I went very quiet because I can't multitask, so I was concentrating very hard on clicking different buttons. I want to pick up now on sort of thinking about the future and thinking about abstraction license applications within the context of mineral planning. Deborah's given us a little bit of background, and an important date is the 1st of January 2018. I'm going to try and not get techie about this, but as is my want, I may do.
I'll step in if he does, don't worry.
I'm sure you will, thanks. Prior to 2018, the audience for dewatering of quarries was the Mineral Planning Authority. That's where the control was effectively held. So dewatering was part of the project description and was written about and assessed within the context of the mineral planning regulations, if you like. The Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales were and are statutory consultees to that process, but the ultimate decision was being made outside their remit. That all changed on the 1st of January 2018, and we're now making an application directly to the Environment Agency or Natural Resources Wales, separate from the planning application. So we have two different audiences. The Mineral Planning Authority, like you guys, are planners, and they and you think in terms of balance. Is this quarry the right thing in the right place? Yes, there may be impacts, there may be environmental impacts, there may be impacts on local residents, dust, noise, vibration, whatever it is. But on balance, it's the right thing to do. And that's the thought process that the planning system works to. That is not the thought process that the Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales work to. Those organisations are full of scientists. They think in terms of data, they think in terms of analysis, and they think in terms of effectively facts. They want hard evidence, they want predictions, and they want to be satisfied that effectively the science behind the application is sound. And that is a very, very different audience from the one that many of you are used to dealing with. In order to help us think about putting that information together, there was a piece of work done by the Environment Agency in 2007. The reference is there, and we can send you this reference if you need it. And it was a piece of work that was specifically developed for the introduction of abstraction licensing for quarry dewatering. No, it was written in 2007. It was a fairly rushed piece of work because licensing was only 6 months away at that stage. I'm sure many of you will remember the 6 months away story. It's a good piece of work, and it's important to realise that really in terms of guidance about the impact appraisal for dewatering from a water point of view, it's essentially all we have. There hasn't been any new work done on this since this document was published. The fundamental approach to assessing impacts and feeding data back to the regulators follows a step-by-step pathway. There's another slide with steps on. There's about 14 steps. The it's important, particularly from your perspective, to consider these as thinking points rather than definitive steps that have to be done. So it's a process, and the thought process needs to be, what's the step mean, and do I need to do anything at this particular step? And that is all dependent on the development that you're proposing, the situation that you're in. But you need to go through the steps in a rational way and record the decision that's being taken about how much effort's going to go into it, and whether the step is needed or not. It's a very good systematic approach, and systematic approaches work well with people that have come in from the planning arena. So as you see, there's 14 steps. I'm not going to go through them all. It's really just an illustration of the method. Remember, the steps aren't prescriptive. The level of effort that you put into any step that does need to be followed is dependent on the situation. The whole method is dependent on the development of a good conceptual model, a good understanding of how water relates to the quarry, surface water, groundwater, where things are coming from, where water's moving to, and how you're going to change that by the dewatering. It's essentially an iterative process. I'm going to just introduce you to 3 structural tiers, and the whole concept is taking the information forward to a point where everybody is happy that the system is understood, and therefore the impacts are predictable. Deborah loves this slide.
I know it spent a lot of time to be like pulled together, but it just looks like DNA to me, and I just can't deal with it.
I love this slide. I think it shows what I want to say really well. I'm not going to focus on it. The key things to take it from it are the DNA, which is really just a way of illustrating the fact that the system is iterative. So we start with some basic ideas and concepts, and we test those, and as we get more information, we get a better conceptual model. So it's for you guys, what's really important is you understand it's an iterative process. It's not a process where you go, we open the box, that's what it is, and that's the answer. The tiers are important because they essentially define the amount of work that we're going to put into any particular level. Tier 1 is something that's quite simple, if you like, the water management system that Deborah showed a couple of slides ago. That would very easily fit into Tier 1. Tier 3 in the UK context may be a complex limestone, karst, sensitive triple SI, SAC, Ramsar site, Natura 2000, all those sorts of things that complicate the system would almost certainly fit into a Tier 3 type of an analysis. And as you can see there, we're going up from simple detail, very detailed. And the important thing is that we jump out of that work, we jump out of the tiers at the appropriate level. Once we're happy, we understand the system appropriately, we jump out of those tiers. We don't just go to Tier 3 because it's the highest level. It's unnecessary and inappropriate. Okay, enough complicated diagrams. Deborah, can you give me a rest? Give my brain a rest and everybody else's brain a rest.
Although, as James said, I don't really like the DNA figure, I do 100% agree with what James is trying to say in it, which is that monitoring is a tool to collect data and evidence, and it has to be iterative. It's got to be changing. It's got to develop like a site would develop, and as the understanding of the site develops, and also lots of things happen off site that can change a conceptual model, or a new receptor can arrive, or there's a new concern that's come up, or maybe you enter part of the middle that you weren't expecting to be more caustic than it was. These things happen as you go through the quarry. And if we stick to one load of monitoring that someone said 20 years ago was the right thing to do, then you're not going to get what you need anymore. So monitoring is one of my favourite things. As you can see, I'm loving life in a picture there, in off-site, away from James, and having the time of my life. But it's important to think about where this monitoring goes on. Sometimes it's on-site, sometimes off-site. The duration that you do the monitoring for. Also, when you start monitoring, you don't want to start too late, but then you also, you don't want to start years and years too early as well. So it's important to think about when, where, and then how you're doing it, because you don't want to throw in everything. You don't want to go gung-ho and tick absolutely every box of monitoring tricks that I can show you. Because people don't want to pay for that, and it won't tell you what you need. If you throw everything at it at one point, you can't build and develop this conceptual model that we are ultimately aiming for, so we can define which tier assessment is suitable. So maybe you start just doing some groundwater level monitoring. Maybe you start doing it manually and you move to automated stuff. Water chemistry sampling, that can vary between automated chemistry, field samples, lab samples, and it all changes. So it's important to make sure that we are doing the right thing at the right time, and that we're looping back each time and just thinking each year, instead of just writing an annual report saying, there we go, we did it for a year and we learned things. It's important to say, like, why did we learn it? What's this? And knowing when enough is important, because I could monitor something to their 10th degree, but it might not be the right thing that's needed. So it's just about thinking what we want to show and getting it right. And then if we haven't got it right, why haven't we got it right, and what can we do differently going forwards? It isn't easy. I mean, it can be part of the battle, but just trying to read James' notes here. But yeah, it's my favourite part of the job, and I think it will lead into going forwards, building into these tiers, which I'm hoping. Oh no, I think I've got the wrong slide next.
Right.
It would have been a great lead.
Yeah. I think the key thing for me that this doesn't have to be a consultant's charter. It needs to be controlled, it needs to be rational, and it needs to be checked. Understanding the requirements and the needs for you guys allows you to challenge what you're being told by other people, and I think that's the key message for me.
Yeah. This is just a quick schematic of, and I thought it was useful just to capture it, to think about why we put monitoring locations in to gather certain evidence for various things. It looks a little bit weird because I've tried to de-geographize it in a way. It is a sand and gravel quarry, and there are surface water receptors off-site and on-site, and that go through the centre of the site. And within a quarry like this, you can have overlapping monitoring schemes. So, for example, here the green circles are groundwater monitoring boreholes that are defined within a planning permission. They were set up to discharge conditions of planning. But the quarry is actually ongoing additional monitoring to the north, where they have a proposed extension. So you can have multiple schemes for different reasons as well, and this will change over time as we, maybe move into the extension area or decide not to. And it's just having different monitoring in different places.
And I guess making that monitoring fit for purpose. So if we just looked at the existing quarry there, while the data that we're gathering there is critical to an application, it's not absolutely fit for purpose for the extension. We need to, I guess, get.
Yeah. And when we first got involved at this quarry, I think on there's 9 boreholes, and in the green circles there was nearly 50 monitoring boreholes on that
Really?
site. Yeah, it was, and the data collection was a mess because they were there was 2 boreholes next to each other that looked the same, and one person's dipped that one month, and then the next month they dipped the next one, and it all fell apart. So it was a good refresh, rethink, choose the best monitoring holes, and in this case, setting up more automated monitoring to get the level of detail that we needed with these sensitive records.
So looking at it rationally within the context of an extension and the license application for the extension actually resulted in a reduction in monitoring.
It did, yeah. A lot less effort for the quarry, and it actually gathers the data that they needed for the extension going forward. Hopefully.
So just to jump back to the tiered the tiers that I talked about earlier, that links to the level of analysis that we want to do on all this evidence that Deborah's collected. And I'm not, you can all read, I don't need to read out bullet points, but the point of that slide is to reinforce this basic, intermediate and detailed analysis. In the vast majority of cases, we're working within sort of the black line between tier 1 and tier 2. It's rare that there will be something as simple as tier 1. But it's also equally rare that there's something as detailed as tier 3. And usually what we end up with is what we call a tier 1, tier 2 assessment, which pulls together a good conceptual model and does a bit of simple analytical modeling or calculations to assess inflows and effects on the local groundwater system. Occasionally, there might be some 2D modelling involved, but even that is pushing the boundaries of the tier 2 assessment. And remember, around that, we've got this iterative process going on. So, how much effort do we put in? This is a slide that we've developed from the Environment Agency guidance. And I think of all the slides we're presenting today, for you guys within estates and planning, this is probably the most useful guide, because it allows us allows you really to undertake a quick scoring and weighting exercise to come up with a view as to how complicated your site is. You'll be familiar with certainly the second box, water-dependent conservation sites. It's not about going out and finding them, it's about whether they're there, and you guys will know whether they're there because they're affecting the planning application process. Water resource availability status comes straight out of the local Environment Agency and NRW licensing policy or CAMS documents, Water Framework Directive documents. Aquifer characteristics, even a quarry geologist can tell you what the answer to those are. I hope there's none of those listening. And dewatering quantity, you could allocate that to, is it a small, medium, large or very large quarry in most circumstances.
Or what type of pump you have.
Or what type of pump you had if you've got an existing site as an extension. So it's a very high level, and it gives you a guide as to the big question that you guys always ask is, how much is it going to cost to do this application? Don't be a slave to it. There's subtleties, but I think it's a really good guide to the process. So if you keep one slide, I would keep that one. So we've got this audience, we've got the presentation, we've got this data, evidence, we've pulled it together into a conceptual model, and we're filling in effectively the support, filling in an application form. And I just wanted to go back to the presentation of information and really reinforce the fact that you want to keep it simple. Okay, I like that acronym, the KISS acronym. As Deborah knows, I use it a lot. Well, the acronym.
I was going to say.
Sorry, yeah. Remember your audience. They're scientists, They want accurate information. They want clear information. Make it easy for yourself. Keep the information that you're presenting brief. Don't use, it doesn't need to be overly complex. It just needs to be brief and accurate and easily read, clear. Put details into an appendix. I've recently been involved in a planning, an expert witness role in Ireland, where I was working as an assistant inspector, working for the planning inspectorate in Ireland. Not for a quarry, it was for a road scheme. And there were thousands and thousands of pages of documentation related to these road schemes. The water aspect, strangely enough, is what I was looking at, and the hydrogeology was hundreds and hundreds of pages scattered across various documents. There was multiple appendices, there was appendices of appendices. It was an absolute nightmare to go through. And it really drove home to me how we're expecting busy people within a regulatory authority to plough through pages and pages of stuff that is largely irrelevant. And it's from that I put this slide in. So keep detail to an appendix, technical appendices. There may be one or two people within NRW or the Environment Agency that are interested in the technical appendix. They will go and seek it if they want it. And the background detail to the technical appendix may be of interest to one person in the regulator. So keep that in a box under your desk. And if they want that very detailed information, they will ask for it, and it's there and available to them if they need it. But it doesn't need to be supplied unless they ask for it. The people on the call from the Environment Agency may have a different view, but I suspect not. So keep it simple is the watchword. What we're going to talk about here, Deborah?
Well, we came up with this clock idea quite a few days ago.
Yesterday.
Yeah, I was trying to pretend we were more prepared than that. This was just highlighting to people when we're starting and the timescales involved in terms of gathering the evidence and allowing that time for the data analysis and the submission. And it was in respect to, for example, a dewatering license, and that we don't just start when we want to put the pump in the hole because you're too late.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's critical to you guys to understand the timing, the time in this, and the timing isn't the process, as you've seen, isn't dissimilar to a planning application, and the timing isn't dissimilar to a planning application, which means we're looking at potentially years in the preparation of an abstraction license application, or the evidence to support it. Filling in the forms takes a couple of days, but it's the stuff that supports. So what we want to do is get across this concept of time, which is why we used a clock face or a month face, or how we want to look at it. And I would work backwards rather than forwards. The determination process is, from a timescale point of view, is exactly the same as a planning application. So it's 4 months. It will be advertised, so it's an advertising month, and then 3 months of determination. So that's fixed. That's fixed by statute. The Environment Agency, NRW, can ask for an extension to that determination phase, which you can say yes to or no to, just like a planning application. Why you would say no, I'm not sure. And if you do and you go through non-determination, then the appeal process is exactly the same as a planning application appeal process, and it's run through PINs in the same way. It's not somewhere you should aim to go for abstraction license appeals, but I suspect it may be somewhere where we do go. We obviously need to prepare a submission. As you can see, there's quite a lot of work to do, so preparing that submission, a couple of months, and that's taking up half that clock. So the question that you need to pose to yourselves is, have I got enough time? When do I need to start? We're not dictating that you can gather evidence in 3 months and analyse the data in 3 months. Like a planning application, you may need a year's worth of environmental monitoring data before you even start doing any analysis. So the point is, you've got to think about the time. Remember, within that timing, in applying for the license, we need quite a lot of detail, as Deborah showed on the license that she used to illustrate the narrative. We need quite a lot of detail on how operationally the license will be used, where are pumps situated, how does that water management plan work, how much water, monitoring conditions, all those sorts of things are detailed, and that requires the input from the operations team, the quarry operation and design team, which is different to a much greater degree than in planning applications. So you're balancing a different team of people in order to get the license application through. It's going to take time. You really need to focus on how long it takes.
Is it a good point, just, I don't know if we come back to it or not, that the evidence is slightly different to that of the planning application in terms of the private water supplies and such that works. I don't think we've quite covered that.
No, we haven't. That's a good point. Often in planning applications, we push detail into pre-commencement conditions, as you know, because the detail is expensive to collect. There is no such thing as a pre-commencement condition, or very rarely such a thing as a pre-commencement condition in an abstraction license. So that detail needs to be, that detailed evidence needs to be collected prior to submission. That means that receptors, particularly other abstractors that may be affected by the dewatering, have to be contacted during the evidence gathering period. Now, quite often in our experience, operators prefer not to contact neighbours if they can avoid it. So you need to prepare yourselves for that sort of evidence gathering and contact with your neighbours and wider neighbours very early on in this process. For a new site, a greenfield site, that could mean contacting people a kilometre away from the site boundary, knocking on their door, in inverted commas, and speaking to them about their abstraction, private water supply, licensed abstraction, whatever it is, well in the garden, well before you're submitting a planning application.
Yeah. James has alluded to in the past couple of slides this conversation that's going to be required with the operational team. What we showed you quite early on when I did sort of the introduction was a very simple water management plan for a quarry. This is probably one of the hardest ones I pulled together, and I started working on this about 1.5 years ago, we think. And I've only just in the past couple of weeks got the final ones of the licenses through, or the determinations through. That's a good 1.5 years of pure data collection, liaison with the quarries, operators, regulators to get a string of licenses. The reason why this was a very complex site is it's a shared sump. It's 2 different quarry operators. It's got stream augmentation going on. You know, it's got lots of different elements. You've got full abstraction licenses in there for both operators for use, and then various dewatering licenses as well. So it is a confusing one, but a very useful one to just sort of show you and just sort of almost discuss that if there was any change to the way the quarry's been operated. For example, I don't know, I think I know this site too well to think of something else. Maybe they needed another pump, or they wanted to start moving the water out of a different part of the sump.
Or changing the process that required more water for washing or whatever.
That's a good one. You know, they could be doing anything like this. Anytime one of those changes needs to happen, you need to vary, you know, your license to make it, you know, as we showed on that PDF, it's quite specific in terms of volumes and locations, so you'd have to change that. But also, when you start the clock in the slide that we just saw before, you need to already have in your mind where these pumps and uses are going to sit. You know, where actually is the sump going to go? How, you know, how is the water going to get between maybe this sump that's quite, you know, some of these quarries are huge, you know, maybe your main dewatering point. How is it going to get to the processing plant where you might want to use it for mineral washing? And it's understanding that connectivity between what is actually going to happen operationally, where the quarry manager makes very clear decisions on site. They now need to be right at the start of that clock, don't they, for when we start this abstraction license process. And that's quite different.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's a big difference in the way that the sort of regulatory processes are managed within operating companies, is the fact that it's a wider team needs to be involved in the design of the project, if you like, on a big abstraction licensing project than has historically been the case in our experience anyway. So just thinking about that, Deborah's talked about altering licenses, amending existing licenses, and we talked about on a complex site, there's all sorts of little things that might do that. So the mindset that we need once we have an abstraction license on a quarry is reviewing things in real time, so that we're linking operational decisions that are being made on the quarry with what the permit or the abstraction license is saying. So we just need to be thinking in real time at a management level, what are we changing operationally? Does it matter? How does that link to the license? And then how complex is that license update? Because that feeds back to the clock and how long it's going to take us to get that process. So the days of doing something ad hoc on a Friday, ready for Monday, unfortunately, guys, have gone. On the basis, on the Thursday, you need to think about those wheels and interchanging and whether doing something on Friday is okay or not. It may be, and then probably 80% of cases it's absolutely fine. But there does need to be a stop and think point to make sure you're not going down a road that you would rather not go down. So I think this is a summary bit, isn't it? This is a pause of breath.
Yeah, I think this is where I try and summarise James's ramblings for the past 45 minutes or so. Basically just trying to take it back to right at the beginning, where are we? So again, we've shut the door on the transitional work. We are in this new licensing in Quarry's world. And I tried to break it down into 3 very simple things from all of James's discussions. Basically, you need to show that you need that water for a dewatering abstraction license. That's very clear to see. We've got a hole full of water and you need it empty. That's quite an easy one, but what volumes are you going to use? How are you going to do it? That's where we need to be thinking. What's the permeability of the material? Is it the same all the way down? Is it the same in that extension across the road that we're thinking about going into? So it's trying to put a volume on that and justifying the use of it. Again, I will just remind people that that is the same process for things like a full abstraction licenses for just the question. If there are ones that haven't yet been picked up, they do need to be justified and submitted as well. We then need to consider the impact section. So this is where we are doing the tier assessment that James took us through. So this is the hydrogeological impact assessment specifically for the abstraction license, so separate potentially to the one for the planning. And this is where we look at the baseline conditions that we have, go through various tests of the receptors in the surrounding area, making sure, are they outside of a radius of influence? Can we degradate them in any way, shape or form? Potentially, are we going to improve them? Let's put quarrying in a positive frame. And then we're looking at potentially coming out of that, any mitigation steps or any license conditions, the same way that you might for planning have a pre-commencement condition. So again, sort of similar but different in it. And then again, the big thing that we keep harking on about is this timing element and the clock. You need to have this license in place before you can do it. It's not a nice to have, it's a legal requirement now. And although we try not to put any units on that clock face, some of these licenses take a long time to get, and there can be many iterations through impacts and degradation clauses and things like that, and that can circle that around quite a few times. So you need to be looking a good distance in the future to where you need to be. And the decision that yourselves, like the planners, need to go through is how you're going to do this alongside a planning application. You could put the planning application in first and get that approved, but then risk potentially not getting an abstraction license. Do you twin track them, or which one's going to take longer? And that again might come back to this consideration of the tiers. Where are we sitting in that? How concerned are we? And things like that. I'm not sure what that's about, but yeah, so these are the three main elements. I don't know if there's something that you wanted to pick up on that I forgot to mention that you were dying to shout out.
No.
We've actually got a question in regards to timing.
Framing.
Ooh,
Framing.
Deborah, James.
We've covered a lot of stuff. It is obvious that there's a lot of information to pull together, and we have to find a way of making the process as simple and easy as possible, and have a high level of success. It's important to remember that everybody's learning. This framework, the regulations are all new. The industry is going up a learning curve. You guys are going up a learning curve. Your geologists are going up a learning curve. Your consultants are going up a learning curve if you use them. And equally, the regulators are going up a learning curve. Many people in the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, haven't looked at the detail that we need to go through now. The people that wrote the guidance in 2007 are no longer involved. Some of them have left the industry, some of them are retired, some of them have moved into different sectors in the regulator, but none of the authors of that document are still at the sharp face of this work. So that knowledge of why things are done why things have been written in the way they've been written is largely lost. And that increases the difficulty of that learning curve. And the way we try and overcome that is by the way in which we frame the submission, the supporting information. And it becomes important because the way we present things, the way we frame things, influences the audience that we're presenting to. And essentially what we're trying to do is just make it as easy as possible for the audience, the people that are reviewing the work, making decisions, to understand it and make the right decision. So that's so placing the information that's understandable. We need to place that information within the regulatory legal framework that they're working to. We need to understand those regulations. We need to understand the European Water Framework Directive assessment and the way in which the regulators have to work to that. We need to understand what the catchment abstraction management strategy is all about. Birds, habitats directives.
Can I put you on pause for a sec? You were in stride, but we've just been asked to understand on this as a question, apparently.
Oh.
And we've muted the person who's getting the questions.
Okay.
But they did put a piece of paper under the door if technology went.
It was actually in regards to your last slide.
Have you unmuted, Lauren?
Yes.
There we go. Yes, yes. Lauren, go ahead.
Sorry, so it was actually in regards to your last slide, and it was to do with timing. And the question was, how early do they have to do, should you think about getting a license before you can abstract? And does that time frame vary depending on how complex the application will be?
The obtaining the license, you need a license immediately before you switch your pump on. So if you got the license the day before you switch your pump on, you're absolutely fine. The challenge is how long it takes to get the license determined. The legal process should take 4 months. The period before submitting the application is about the data gathering and the evidence-based gathering, and that is the challenge, is how long will that evidence-based gathering take? That evidence-based gathering and the interpretation of that data links back to the tiers. If you've got a tier 1 assessment for an extension, and you're going to use the existing quarry as an analogy to for your extension, so you kind of know what's going on because you've been monitoring it for 10 years, and it's essentially the same, the impact's the same. You'd probably pull that evidence base together in 3 or 4 months. If you've got a tier 3 assessment and you've got a karst limestone system with an SAC, a special area of conservation, European level protected water-based environmental site within the catchment of your quarry, you could be talking 5 years to pull that evidence base together. We've been working on a quarry which has a triple SI interest, that has taken, for an extension, that has taken 6 years to get to a point where everybody's happy. So it's the tier 3 ones that are scary in terms of timescale. So the important thing is to understand, as you're thinking about things, whether you're tier 2 or tier 3. Tier 2 would be probably a year to 18 months of evidence gathering, some of which, if it's an extension, you will already have. You know, greenfield sites, years, extensions, sub 1 year, if you've got a scheme of monitoring that's appropriate.
Perfect. We have actually got another question, but I think it's in relation to the framing slide.
Okay.
And that says, surely we cannot simply ignore the process of consultation under planning. Effectively, you're saying that this process is now irrelevant to hydrological aspects.
No, I don't agree with that. A fundamental part of the challenge for you guys is the linking of this work for your abstraction licenses to your planning process. It is essential that we don't replicate work. That would just be a mad thing to do. So what's important is that we recognise that we have 2 different audiences. We potentially have 1 piece of work. So we know we need an HIA for planning, which will get scoped as to whether it's part of an environmental statement or part of a formal EIA. The closer it is to a formal EIA, the more similar it will be to an abstraction license application, HIA. I suspect where we'll move to fairly rapidly is that there will be one HIA done, hydrogeological HIA done, that is sufficient for dewatering, because if it's right for dewatering, it will be right for planning. But it doesn't detract from the planning process in any way. If anything, it supports it and works within it. But the important thing is that it's different. Your audience for the dewatering is different from the planning, and stuff needs to be framed and presented in a way that the new audience can assimilate easily, which is me finishing the framing slide.
Okay, we do actually have two other questions which we can come back to if you want to continue with the framing slide.
No, I won't continue with the framing.
Okay.
We've said it, and I suspect the questions I'll come back to with the questions. Just very quickly, this is the last slide, and then we'll come on to the questions. So key messages. The audience has changed. The HIA for dewatering needs to be more systematic. It needs to be evidence and science-based, and that evidence and science-based needs to be tested through this iteration process to know that we're right. It's important that you know the subject, or whoever you're working with knows their subject, and that they know the rules by which they're being operated, so that they're getting it framed in the right way. The operations team and quarry designers need an early input. That is really important, and that's different from the planning process. And timing is really key. It would be very, very easy to run out of time and have a quarry extension or greenfield quarry that has permission, but you can't operate because you can't do water. And within all that, in terms of presentation and messaging, keep it simple. Okay, back to questions. Lauren.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, so we've got one that says, how confident are you that the EA is fit for purpose and committed to deliver the licenses in a timely manner, bearing in mind EA performance in recent past? Bit of a controversial one.
It is a controversial one. It's a fair question, and I know that we have Environment Agency members of staff on the webinar, and it is fair to say that there's Envireau Waters have a reputation for being hard and tenacious with Environment Agency. Having said that, we're not in the field of regulated bashing. It serves absolutely no purpose at all. The regulators, the Environment Agency and NRW are what they are. They're groups of people. Those people the different people have different levels of expertise and experience. What we find is important is making sure that you're speaking to the right person within those organisations. It is unfair and inappropriate to think that everybody within a regulatory organisation has the same level of knowledge as everybody else. It would be unfair in any organisation, business organisation. You get people that are specialists, that have more experience, and if you've got a particularly difficult site, then it's important that you're speaking to the right person, and that may not be the person that picks up the phone from an initial inquiry. It's also important to frame your information, to present your information in a way that the regulator can assimilate. There's no point in bashing the table and stamping your feet and demanding things that from a legal or regulatory point of view, the regulator just cannot give you. You know, it's frustrating for them and it's frustrating for you. So asking for the right thing, understanding the rules and asking for things that can be given is a big start. Presenting information in a way that the regulator can assimilate is a big start. Fundamentally, the regulators do want to do what's right. They're balancing different things. They've got, for every quarry operator that's asking to dewater, they've got 4 NGOs or ENGOs screaming about the fact that people shouldn't be dewatering. So they've got competing interests coming in at them, and we need to help them come to an appropriate decision. We need to ask for things that are appropriate and real. Yes, there are challenges. There's challenges as we go up the learning curve. We've got to get individual regulator officers to understand the industry. They need to understand the differences between dewatering and a standard abstraction for making nails or growing potatoes or whatever, or public water supply. They're different. So there are challenges, but by approaching it the right way, I think those challenges can be overcome. Without a doubt, I also think that we will be going into appeal situations where the regulators don't get it on a particular application. But you know, those will be few and far between. But I suspect we will end up getting there at some point.
Yeah, I was just going to add that when we've been going through this transitional arrangements, the EA previously, the quarry industry sort of been quite down the list in terms of abstractions. You know, there's very few. Well, you know, there's only a couple of full abstraction licenses and bits and pieces like that around. People weren't doing the big dewatering, you know, abstraction licenses and things like that. And the EA have put a lot of effort into training people up, and even how I've been communicating with the permitting officers, that has improved over the past 2 years or so that we've been doing it. And a lot of operators have engaged with that and getting them to site, getting the officers out into the sites and having it and just helping that distinguish, you know, distinguishing between that is my dewatering pump, that is my tiny little dust suppression one. Don't consider them the same way. So I think both sides of the table are working on that, that curve.
Yeah, I think also for, you know, from you guys from a planning estates point of view, you're dealing with people that they're just different from planners. You know, they have a different mindset, they have a different background, and you need to you need to remember that. You need to go to them with evidence. You know, it's an evidence-based system, not a balance-based system.
Okay, and then our next question is, can you comment on any experience you have over the new era in relation to quarry extensions? If an operator wishes to continue dewatering under their existing arrangements, should the EA consider this as a new site and therefore apply what appears to be a much more rigorous review of the HIA, or acknowledge that this is a legacy process and take this into account?
Yes. There's so much stuff in there. Where can we start? The starting point for us, and this is the approach we took with the transitional provisions application. So where a quarry had permission for an extension that hadn't been moved into. So effectively the red line of the site was around an extension area as part of the transitional provisions. Then we included that within our area of dewatering, and that's for most quarries, which means that once the licenses are determined, then that they can move the dewatering into those areas. So if you like, a sand and gravel quarry with paddock dewatering would just move through the extension area in the normal way, which removes that situation. Once, if you're not in that situation, and we're looking at 2 or 3 extensions at the moment to existing quarries. We haven't got to abstraction licensing yet. It's still in the sort of early days of the planning stage. The simple answer is yes, the Environment Agency can and will look at the existing dewatering and what that means for the extension. From our point of view, the way we would present that is by using the existing quarry as an analogy for the extension. So we would develop the conceptual model based on the evidence that we have for the existing quarry, which means we are assessing, we're effectively bringing that existing quarry into the assessment and then putting the extension into that frame or that context and doing the impact assessment from there. So we would acknowledge, we would essentially do that for the Environment Agency, which means it allows us to frame it in the right way and put everything into the right context. So that's how we would appreciate it. But it's an important part of that conceptual model and the impact assessment is what's going on now and how are we going to change that. There's some subtleties and sort of policy positions that the Environment Agency have developed about additional impact in that sort of situation, which we won't go into the nitty-gritty of. But it's making sure that the agency don't go off on one, basically, inappropriately and take stuff out of context, is the way I'm managing.
I think the other thing you would just have to keep an eye on is that anything that got validated and then determined through the transitional arrangements could have gone through on a very, very light evidence base. I mean, we've had some through that were very vague, and maybe I don't know how it's going to work out in the end, but they might be less confident if you still had no groundwater level data or you still weren't metering stuff, then they wouldn't be quite as comfortable with that extension being, you couldn't do it in the same analogous sort of way because you don't have the evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
So I think that would just be, I know I hark on about monitoring a lot, but yeah, having that data would only support you in that type of
absolutely. Yeah. I am working on the basis that you have evidence for your existing quarry.
Yeah.
If you haven't got evidence, you've got to get evidence. It's a science-led approach. It's not a table thumping approach.
Is there anything else?
Okay, so we haven't actually got any more questions at the moment. So if anyone's got any, now is your time to submit them. But is there any kind of common misconceptions or anything that you would just like to finish on?
If you've got questions that come to mind, then email Lauren and she'll be more than happy to answer them.
I will try my best.
You've probably heard this presentation enough times by now to be able to.
We've gone a little bit over time, so I'm sure everybody's wanted to rush off to their next Zoom or MS Teams meeting.
Oh no, mine was lunch next.
Oh, was it lunch?
Yeah, you promised me cake.
No, you promised me cake. Lauren will get cake.
I'll get cake.
I'd just like to thank Deborah and Lauren for the effort that they've put into this. As you probably guessed, the effort didn't come from me, it came from those two. Why I didn't know which buttons to press. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd particularly like to thank those people that joined us from overseas, and I hope you found it interesting and relevant to some degree from wherever you're working. Obviously, we're here. If you have any further questions, in all seriousness, drop us an email, pick up the phone, and we can talk through whatever it is that comes to mind. So unless there's anything popped in the last few seconds, I think we should call the webinar to a close, and wish you all well for your day. So hopefully it's as sunny now with you as it is here after a horrendous day yesterday.
Yeah, we've had no more questions, but just a positive to finish on, and that was well done, good presentation. So thank you for bearing with us. It was our first webinar, so there were a few hiccups, but we got there, and yeah, we all hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.